Traveling through that region was risky in itself, but being stranded in the middle of the desert at night was the worst possible scenario. Me and 4 other guys saw us crossing a remote stretch when a sandstorm started to form. The wind was so strong that we could barely see each other, and the air seemed to cut into our skin. Our guide decided it was best to find some makeshift shelter until the storm passed. After being blinded for a while, we stumbled upon an abandoned shack, an old building made of rotten wood and rusty metal. It wasn't exactly safe, but it was better than suffocating outside. The night was terrible. The shack creaked with every gust of wind, and the feeling that I wasn't alone in that place made me uneasy. But tiredness overcame fear, and somehow I managed to doze off. When I woke up, something was wrong. Santiago, the guy who slept next to me, was no longer there. At first, I managed that he had only gone out to take a piss, but his belongings were still there. Backpack, water bottle, coat. I called his name a few times, but only silence responded. My hair stood on end. Nobody just disappears like that in the middle of nowhere without taking anything. I grabbed my flashlight and left the shack, trying to ignore the bad feeling in my stomach. The storm had passed, but the early morning cold cut like a blade. I called Santiago again, walking around the shelter, but nothing. The others woke up when I moved, and one by one started looking too. It doesn't make sense. There were no footprints in the sand other than ours, nothing beneath which he had walked. It was as if it had evaporated. After about 20 minutes, one of the similar guys. I ran over to him and found him standing still, staring blankly into the future. I followed his gaze and saw Santiago. He was there, about 10 meters away, standing, looking at the ground, completely still. I approached slowly, calling out to him, but he didn't respond. When I finally got close, I felt a chill run up my spine. His face. Something was wrong. His skin seemed drier, his eyes sunken, his lips chapped as if he had been dehydrated for days. He turned slowly and murmured something, his voice hoarse, almost without strength. They, in the dark, saw me. I froze. He tried to say something more, but the words came out jumbled, incomprehensible. Suddenly, as if his strength had been completely exhausted, he fell to his knees and collapsed onto the sand. We ran to try to help him. One of the guys grabbed a bottle of water and tried to make him drink, but Santiago seemed to be far away, as if he couldn't react anymore. His skin was so pale that he barely looked like he had been a few hours ago. The way he breathed was strange, short, irregular, as if something inside him was failing. I tried to ask what happened, where he had been, but he just stared into space, mumbling nonsense. They were there, in the dark. They saw me. That left me with a lump in my throat. Who they? What did he mean by that? We took Santiago back to the shack and tried to warm him up. But with every hour that passed, he got worse. His eyes lost their shine. His hands shook constantly. And his skin seemed to be aging before our eyes. Wrinkles have deepened. Hair has turned gray. It wasn't possible. This wasn't just dehydration or tiredness. Something was draining him from the inside out. Fear began to spread throughout the group. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no doctors, no help, and no explanation for what was happening. We tried to keep it alive. We showed water, covered him with everything we had, but nothing helped. Santiago only became weaker, drier. It was as if the life was being sucked out of him, little by little. His face no longer looked like the same man I had talked to the night before. It looked like a waterfall, a body at the end of the line. His eyes, which before had that intense shine of someone facing any challenge, were now just opaque, soulless shadows. The worst part was the continuous murmur. Even without strength, he repeated the same words, quietly, like a broken mantra. They were there, in the dark. They saw me. Time passed slowly. When the sun finally started to rise, we decided that we needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. But Santiago no longer moved. His breathing was almost non-existent, and his skin looked like old parchment. Whatever happened to him that night, it wasn't something I could understand. It was as if something had sucked years of his life away in a matter of hours. But what really scared me was the feeling that it wasn't over. Because as we packed our things to leave, I felt a chill on my neck and looked inside the shack. In the darkest corner, where the sunlight had not yet progressed, I saw something was confused, or rather, something retreating. My heart almost stopped. It was fast, very fast. I couldn't see a shape, a face, or anything concrete. Just a figure, a dense shadow that slipped into the darkness and disappeared. My instinct screamed to get out of there as quickly as possible. I looked at the others, but no one seemed to have seen. Maybe it was all in my head. The tiredness, the fear. But what if it wasn't? I looked at Santiago once again. He didn't move. His skin now felt like thin, fragile paper. The face was no longer bad. We decided to continue our journey, even carrying the weight of guilt and fear. We couldn't stay there. Bury him? We didn't even consider it. It didn't work. So we left him in the shack, covered the body with whatever we could, and continued on our way. The silence was heavy, as no one wanted to admit what they really felt. After a few hours of walking, one of the guys who was with us broke the silence and said quietly, "We're never talking about this again, okay?" Nobody disagreed, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't forget. No matter how much time passes, that night still haunts me. Because to this day, when I close my eyes, I still see that figure. And worse, I still feel like he sees me back. The house was old, but it had a certain charm. Since moving in, my wife and I have been excited to renovate it and make it our home. But there was one thing that bothered us from day one: the basement. It was small, damp, and with that smell of old wood mixed with mold. Nothing too weird about that. Old houses have weird basements all the time. But our pup, Thor, had a different opinion. He simply refused to go down the stairs. No matter how much we called or tried to coax him with snacks, he would stall at the entrance and start growling, his hair standing on end. We laughed about it, saying he was just being chicken, but deep down, it made me uncomfortable. The first night we slept there, we heard a noise coming from the basement. Nothing loud, nothing scary, just a low sound, almost like a murmur. The house was old. The pipes creaked and the wood creaked from the cold, so we didn't think much about it. But the next night it happened again, and in the other. Always that muffled sound, like someone was whispering downstairs. My wife joked that we should have gotten a haunted house, and I laughed. But inside, something didn't feel right. One night, after another one of those strange noises, I decided to check the basement once and for all. I grabbed a flashlight, went down the creaky stairs, and looked around. Nothing. Just old boxes, dust, and that delicious smell of damp. I swept the light around the corners, trying to find any logical explanation. But there was nothing but emptiness and absolute silence. I went back upstairs a little frustrated, thinking it must just be the house settling down. But that night, the noise returned, clearer than before. I swear this time it sounded like a voice, very faint, like someone was whispering my name. The next day, my wife and I mentioned it again, but we laughed, trying not to make it important. "The house is trying to test us," she joked. But Thor continued to refuse to go near the basement. Now he didn't even go near the door. Whenever we got close, he would start to growl and move away, restless. That's when something strange happened. My wife went to work. I left the house alone. I was on the couch watching TV when I heard it. A voice. "Come down, call my name." But it wasn't just any voice. It was my wife's voice, coming from the basement. My body instantly froze. The sound did not come muffled like the previous murmurs. It was clear, as if she were down there, calling me. "Love?" I heard again, in a calm, natural tone. But I knew it couldn't be her. I even saw her leave for work minutes before. My heart started to pound in my chest. The TV was still on. But at that moment, the sound seemed distant, as if everything around it had faded into the background. I stood there on the couch, trying to rationalize. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was a strange echo from the house. But then I heard it again. This time, closer. "Love, can you come down here?" I got up slowly, without making a sound, as if any movement would attract attention. Whatever was down there knew my name. I knew what my wife's voice sounded like. My instinct screamed not to move, but curiosity, that stupid impulse, almost made me take a step towards the cellar door. The doorknob seemed so close, just a few feet away. But then Thor started to growl. It's not a normal growl. It was a serious, deep sound, a warning. He was standing at the entrance to the hallway, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the basement door. And that's when I realized, if it was really my wife, why would the dog be acting like that? I can't move. The air around me felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath with me. My wife's voice didn't call me again, but I knew it was there. I felt that. The silence in the basement was dense, suffocating. My hand was shaking, but I wasn't going to open that door. Something inside me screamed, not to do this. Thor continued to growl, motionless, tense, and then, out of nowhere, came the final blow. 3 sharp knocks on the cellar door. "Get out of there!" I simply turned my back and went straight to the sofa, sat down and stood there, facing the door, not knowing what to do. I wasn't going to go down. I wasn't going to open it. And I wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened. My wife arrived an hour later. As soon as I walked in the door, I discovered something was wrong. My face must have been pale because she frowned and said what had happened. But I couldn't answer. I just looked at her, still feeling that chill down my spine. You knew that the thing in the basement had spoken with her voice. But if I told you, what if she'd start listening too? Being a single parent is hard enough, but when you start to feel like something isn't right in your own home, it becomes unbearable. I live with my 7-year-old son in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people mow their lawns religiously and greet each other at the grocery store. I've never had any security issues, but as a precaution, I've installed cameras around the house, including one outside for the backyard. For months, they only caught passing cats, swaying branches, and, occasionally, an unlucky possum. But then, out of nowhere, we received movement alerts at normal times. In the beginning, there wasn't much ball. Every time I checked the footage, I only saw darkness. Maybe a camera error, maybe a weird reflection. But the warnings continue. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Sometimes a single alert. Other times, 5 or 6 in a row. This started to make me uneasy. My yard didn't have anything that could activate the sensor like that. And if it was an animal, at least I would see something in the recording. But no, always the same emptiness. the same dense darkness, as if the camera was capturing something that my eyes couldn't see. One Friday night, after putting my son to sleep, I sat on the couch and was looking at my cell phone, trying to forget this story. But then came another alert from the camera. My stomach immediately turned. I opened the app expecting to see the same darkness as always. But this time, it wasn't just darkness. In the corner of the screen, almost imperceptible, there was something... a shadow. I couldn't see shape, face, anything defined. Just a dark blur, standing near the back fence. My heart started to race. I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize. It could be a problem with the camera, a sensor defect. But then right in front of me, I saw another motion alert appear. I looked at the screen, waiting for the shadow to move. But it didn't. I didn't think twice. I got up, went to the living room window and looked through the blinds. That's when the real fear hit. There was someone out there. There is no shadow on the camera. Someone real. A figure stood by the fence, motionless, staring at me. I couldn't see details in the dark, but the silhouette was clear. Broad shoulders, rigid posture, without any movement. I tried to tell myself it was just a neighbor, someone passing by. But who the hell stays stopped in someone else's yard without moving for minutes? I swallowed hard. If you were an attacker, why wouldn't you do anything? I just stood there, looking at myself, without moving. My first thought was to pick up my cell phone and call the police, but deep down I knew that when they arrived, they probably wouldn't find anything. So I did what any parent would do. I went to get a base bat that I kept in the closet by the door. If it was an attacker, at least I would be prepared. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and slowly walked out into the yard, keeping my eyes fixed on the figure standing by the fence. My heart was beating so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat. But the moment I stepped foot outside, the distant figure, he didn't run. He didn't make any noise. He didn't show any sign of movement. 1 second it was there. The next, it was simply, it disappeared. I walked to the fence, scanning the entire yard with my eyes. But there was no one. No signs of footprints. Nothing to indicate that anyone had actually been there. It was as if my mind had played a trick on me. But I knew I wasn't imagining things. I weed that silhouette, and the camera recorded something. The worst was when I got back home. I found my son standing in the hallway, eyes wide. Before I could ask what happened, he said quietly, trembling, "Dad, who was that man looking at me through the window?" My blood ran cold instantly. I wanted to believe I had heard wrong, but the look in my son's eyes said it all. He was terrified. I ran to his room, heart racing, and went straight to the window. Nothing out there. No footprints in the grass. No movement. But what really made me feel bad was realizing that the height of his bedroom window was much higher than what an average adult would reach outside. For someone to look inside, they would have to be on top of something or be much taller than any normal person. I pulled my son close and tried to calm him down, saying it must have been a reflex or something in our heads. But he just shook his head and said, "He was there, Dad. He was smiling." At that moment, I felt a chill go up my spine, as if something was watching me right there, inside my own home. I knew that whatever this thing was, it hadn't just disappeared. I was just waiting. I worked as an app delivery person about 3 years ago, and at that time I had seen it all. Naked people opening the door, customers who cursed me for being late even though the storm was raging, even a guy who insisted that I eat a slice of pizza that he ordered just to prove that nothing was wrong. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that night. It was a Friday, early in the morning, and I was already planning to make my last delivery before going home. The order was simple. A Chinese food combo, the kind that comes with fried rice, sweet and sour chicken, and spring rolls. I picked up the order at the restaurant and confirmed the address on the app. A group of distant houses, almost on the outskirts of the city. I had made deliveries there before, so I didn't see anything strange until my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was a prank call or spam. But something made me slide my finger on the screen. On the other side, a guy talking quickly, a little desperate. He confirmed my name and said if I had the order. When he answered yes, he practically begged. For the love of God, don't deliver to that address. I'll pay double the tip. Just take it somewhere else. I'll send you the location. My first instinct was to think it was a scam. But his tone... Man, he sounded genuinely scared. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to decide what to do. And then I saw a notification on the app. He had increased the tip to an absurd amount. My tiredness and common sense went out the window right away. I accepted. The new location was about 15 minutes away, a 24-hour gas station on the side of the road. As I drove, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a case of betrayal. I've seen people asking to change their address because their boyfriend or girlfriend couldn't know about the request. Or, I don't know, a family fight. But the guy's tone of voice bothered me. He didn't seem so anxious. He seemed panicked. When I arrived at the station, I parked near the pumps and waited. The place was practically deserted. Just a sleepy attendant inside the convenience store, and a truck driver gassing up nearby. My cell phone vibrates. "I'm in the black truck," the message said. I looked around and saw the vehicle parked near the entrance to the gas station. The dark glass prevented him from seeing who was inside, but as soon as he got out of the car, the headlight blinked twice. I swallowed hard. Something about this exchange felt off, but I was already there, so I walked to the car. As I got close, the passenger window rolled down a little. A man was waiting for me in the driver's seat, but his face was almost completely covered by a cap and a black mask. All I could see were his eyes, and boy, did they have an unsettling glow. Like he'd been up all night, or he was terrified. He held out his hand with the money, and I handed him the package of food. "Thank you," he murmured, looking around nervously. Then he sped up and disappeared down the road, leaving me standing there with a wad of bills in my hand and a shiver down my spine. I got back to the car, still feeling a strange discomfort. What the hell had just happened? I picked up my phone to check the app, and that's when I noticed something strange. The order was still marked as in delivery. Typically, when a person completes a delivery, the status changes to completed immediately. But this one, no. As if the system was still expecting me to deliver to the original address. A cold crept up the back of my neck. Something told me that I would just drive home and forget about that night. But a morbid curiosity began to grow inside me. Against all common sense, I opened the GPS and typed in the original address. Just wanted to take a look. The house was on a dark and quiet street. As I turned the corner, I felt my stomach sink. Red and blue lights flashed between the trees. Vehicles. Several. The police were circulating around the yard, and an ambulance was parked at the entrance, its doors open. But no one was being carried inside. It gave me goosebumps. It was as if they already knew there was no one there to be saved. I didn't want to look suspicious, so I drove slowly, just enough to peek out the window. The door to the house was wide open. Something dark stained the threshold. I don't need to get any closer to understand. Blood. My mouth instantly went dry. I had just avoided that. Whatever happened in that house, I was almost the guy knocking on the door with a bag of food while God knows what was going on inside. My heart pounded as I walked down the street, trying to act normal, but my head was spinning. Who was the guy who called me? Did he know this would happen? Or was he responsible? I stepped on the gas and turned the first corner, feeling my breath heavy. My mother was shaking as I picked up my cell phone to call the unknown number back. I only called once before it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I pulled the car over to a deserted shoulder, my mind spinning. I took the notes he gave me. There was nothing strange about them. Ordinary money. But still, I felt dirty. Should I call the police? Tell me that a mysterious client asked me not to go to a place where, coincidentally, a murder took place. And how would I explain that I accepted without question, just because the guy threw some extra money into my account? I swallowed hard and looked in the rearview mirror. For the first time that night, I realized something frightening. If I had followed the plan, I would have made the normal delivery. I could be a person in that ambulance right now. My entire body was tense. I need to get out of there. I started the car and drove aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to organize my thoughts. What disturbed me most was the uncertainty. I didn't know if I had helped someone escape something horrible, or if I had been unwittingly complicit in something much worse. And the worst, if anyone knew I was involved. Did the man in the truck use me to create an alibi? Was I now in the crosshairs of something I didn't even understand? My chest felt heavy with the feeling that something invisible was watching me. I arrived home with that paranoia still eating away at my mind. I locked the door twice and sat on the couch, looking at the phone. I tried calling the number again, only to hear the same automated message saying the phone was disconnected. As if that connection never existed. The next day, I searched the local news for any information about the crime, but found nothing. Not a note, not a report card, nothing. It was as if it had never happened. But I saw it. I saw the lights, the ambulance, the blood on the doorstep. And to this day, I wondered, who the hell was that man in the truck? And what exactly did I deliver that night? I was never a guy who questioned things a lot. I always did my job, got my paycheck, and went home without annoying anyone. So when I got that job as a night cleaner at a fancy restaurant in town, I discovered I'd made it kind of big. The salary was excellent for someone with no experience, and the tasks were simple. Mopping the floors, cleaning tables, cleaning up the kitchen. But from day one, I was given very specific instructions. Some areas of the restaurant were not my responsibility. If you're locked up, you don't clean. If the owners are already cleaning, you pretend you didn't even... That's how the manager said it, with a look that made me feel like I was signing a silent contract. At first, we followed the rules without question. Who am I to fight when you're paying me well? But over time, I started to notice strange things. Every night after the customers left, the owners would appear out of nowhere, wearing aprons that I never saw during work hours. And I always went straight to the same locked room in the back. The smell coming from there was different from the rest of the restaurant. Something metallic and sour, which sticks in the throat. I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity grew. Until one night, the door wasn't completely closed, and I did what I shouldn't have done. My heart was pounding as I carefully pushed the door open. The smell was worse inside, almost suffocating. The room was small, with shelves against the walls, filled with cleaning products and black trash bags. But right in the center, something that doesn't make sense. A single wooden chair, with chains screwed to the floor. Around it, the chains compensate for expenses, as if they had already been used many times. My stomach turned. This doesn't make sense. What the hell does a restaurant need such a thing? That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, and there he was. The owner of the restaurant. Tall, always well-dressed, but now without the apron. Just an impeccable dress shirt, and that empty look. He stood at the door, blocking my exit, without saying a word. The silence was deafening. My throat dried out and my hands started to sweat. I wanted to say something, make up an excuse, but my mind was a blur. He just breathed in for what seemed like an eternity, then slowly left the door and closed it back, locking it with the key in his pocket. Then, without looking at me, he simply walked out of the hallway. I stood there, not knowing whether I should pretend nothing happened or run away. My whole body said I had made a huge mistake. I tried to go back to work as if nothing had happened, scrubbing the kitchen floor with my tremendous hands, but every second that passed made me feel more exposed, like something was about to happen. The owner didn't say anything for the rest of the night, but I knew he had seen me. And worse, he didn't seem surprised nor angry. He seemed evaluating something, as if he already knew what would come next. When I finished my shift and left the restaurant, the city seemed darker than usual. The streets were empty. The cold wind bit my skin, and I felt like I was being distributed. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket. A message. I picked up the device with trembling fingers and read the words that made my stomach drop. Your employment has been terminated. Pack your things and leave town today. The number was unknown. I looked around, trying to see if anyone was watching me, but all I saw were shadows and flickering streetlights. A shiver ran up my spine. I didn't know who had sent me that, but I knew it wasn't a request. It was a warning. My mind was spinning. This was not normal. When someone is fired, they receive a call, an email, something formal. But an anonymous message in the middle of the night, translated to leave the city. My instinct screamed that this was not a suggestion. I got into my car and stayed there for a few minutes, looking at my cell phone screen. I thought about answering, asking why. But something inside me said I already knew the answer. A chair. Like chains. The empty stare of the restaurant owner. I shouldn't have seen that. Suddenly, I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car parked on the other side of the street, headlights off. It could be coincidental, but my heart skipped a beat. I started the engine as quickly as I could and drove away without looking back. I took the first route out of town, not thinking about anything other than putting distance between myself and that restaurant. As I drove, one last doubt gnawed at me. What if I had seen it too late? What if, at that exact moment, someone was following me? My gaze went from the rearview mirror to the road every few seconds. The black car was still there, keeping its distance, but never far enough away to disappear from my field of vision. My chest tightened every time I turned a corner, and he did the same. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it could just be paranoia. But deep down, I knew. The message, the warning, the chair, everything was connected. The only thing I didn't know was what exactly I had seen in the room, or who, or what, used to be trapped there. After almost an hour of aimless driving, I finally stopped at a 24-hour gas station, trying to think of what to do. The black car passed straight down the road and stood away in the darkness. I should have felt relieved, but the fear remained there, clinging to my chest like a weight. I picked up my phone and thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Hi, I went into a room where I shouldn't have, and now I feel like I'm being chased. There was no proof, Just my intuition told me that I would probably sum it up. Forever. I sat in the car seat with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. My body wanted to keep driving until there was no more road left, but my mind tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a strange mission. Maybe I'm exaggerating. But what if not? What if that warning was real? I looked at my cell phone again, and a new message appeared on the screen. Still here? My blood ran cold. There was no number, nothing. Just 2 words, cold and direct. Look around the station. Everything seemed normal. The gas station attendant yawning at the register, a truck parked next door, a couple getting coffee at the convenience store. But the feeling of being watched grew inside me like poison. At that moment, I made my decision. I started the car and accelerated, taking the highway without looking back. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to go. After that night, I never returned to the city. I never tried to find out what was happening in that restaurant. Nor did I try to find out who sent me the messages. All I know is that whatever was trapped in that room, I was lucky. Lots of luck. Because somehow, I escaped. But to this day, when I walk into a new restaurant, I always look around the back, and I see a locked door. I pretend it doesn't even exist. We had been on the road for almost an hour when it happened. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning, and there was just us and a heavy silence that seemed to swallow the highway. I drove while the rest of the group, Lucas, Danny, and Rafa, tried to stay awake, but tiredness was already taking its toll. We had already spent the weekend at a farm, and now we just wanted to get home. The road was a long rural stretch with no lighting, just the headlights cutting through the darkness and the monotonous sound of tires on the asphalt. Everything was peaceful, until Danny, who was in the passenger seat, murmured, "There's someone walking in front." I focused my eyes on the road and saw the silhouette. A man, walking along the side of the road, alone in the middle of nowhere. He was wearing dark clothes, and his walk was slow, as if he were wandering aimlessly. Strange, but not impossible. We've seen people walking through everything before. "Maybe his car will cut out," Rafa suggested from the back seat. But something bothered me. The way he walked, a little stiffly, without even looking back when our headlights illuminated him. When I met him, that's when it happened. He turned his face towards us, and my heart went cold. Because that face, I knew it. My blood ran cold instantly. It was impossible. But I knew exactly who that man was. Lucas in the back seat cursed and leaned forward. "Man, that doesn't make sense," he muttered in a low voice, almost as if he was afraid to say it out loud. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak, but everyone there saw it. Everyone considered. That face belongs to someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who was dead. It was Diego, our friend. The same Diego who had died 3 years ago. Run over on that same road. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to hurt my chest. This can't be real," Danny whispered, looking back. But when we did the same, he was gone. The shoulder was empty, as if nothing had ever happened there. A heavy silence took over the car. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to process it. My hands were so soft I could barely hold the steering wheel. Rafa cut the silence first. "Tell me you saw that too." We saw it, and that was wrong. The rest of the way was a blur. No one said anything. Only the sound of the engine filled the suffocating silence. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind was running in circles. Diego was dead. We had gone to the wake. I had carried the coffin myself along with Lucas. So how the hell did we just see him walking down the road with that blank look on his face, like he was waiting for us? None of us had the courage to say it out loud. But one thing was certain. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't our mind playing tricks. We all saw the same thing. When we finally arrived in the city, we stopped the car in a gas station parking lot, and Danny was the first to say, "The dashboard camera." My heart accelerated. Yes, the car had a dash cam recording all the time. If that had been real, the camera would have caught it. If it were a collective delusion, the recording would be empty. I took out my cell phone and opened the app connected to the camera, with my hands shaking. The video loaded, the road, the headlights illuminating the darkness. And then, he appeared. The man walks along the shoulder, the blood drained from my face. He was there. But when he turned his face to the camera, his features were blurred. It was as if the camera couldn't focus on his face. The rest of the video was clear. The road, the shoulder, even the dust kicking up as we passed. But Diego's face, a distorted blur, as if something was preventing it from registering correctly. Danny put her hand over her mouth. Rafa threw himself off the screen, as if it was going to jump at him. "This isn't normal," Lucas muttered, staring at his cell phone. My chest was heavy. My breathing was short. Seeing that in person had already been scary, but knowing that the camera captured it, and at the same time, failed to capture the thing it saw. This was worse. That made it not a trick of our heads. I closed the video, trying to trick my heart. "We need to find out what this means," said Danny. But no one responded, because deep down, we knew. We knew where Diego had died. We knew it was on that road, at that same time of night. And now, we knew he was still there. But the question that burned in my mind, that I didn't have the courage to say out loud was he still there because he wanted to, or because I couldn't get out? The silence between us was crushing. The video was still playing in my head, that face blurred, as if something bigger was preventing us from seeing the truth. "Are we going back there?" Lucas asked hesitantly. My every instinct screamed to forget about it, to pretend it never happened. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to admit, felt like we owed Diego something. He was our friend. If somehow he was still trapped there, shouldn't we at least try to understand why? I exchanged glances with Danny and Rafa. Neither of us wanted to say yes, but we didn't want to say no either. We decided to go back the next night. I don't know if it was courage or stupidity, but at 2 a.m. we were there again, driving slowly along the same stretch of road. The car was silent, everyone lost in their own thoughts. The shoulder seemed empty this time, but there was something different in the air, an invisible electricity, as if something was waiting for us. My chest tightened, and I held tight to the steering wheel. "Whatever it is, we're in this together," Danny whispered, almost as if she was trying to convince herself. Then, without warning, the car radio screeched, and a voice came from the speakers, low and distorted. A single word, repeated twice, filled with static and despair. "Help! Help!" My body froze. The hiss continued on the radio, as if something was trying to cut through the static, but the voice was gone. "You heard that, right?" Rafa asked, his voice shaking. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say it was interference. But everyone in the car was looking at the radio as if it was hurt. My heart hammered against my chest. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't coincidental. Diego was trying to communicate, or something that looked like Diego. Suddenly, Danny gasped and was assigned to the road. "There!" My blood ran cold. He was there again. The same man, the same slow walk, the same overwhelming presence. But this time, he didn't wait for us to pass before turning away. He was already looking straight at us. And for the first time, I saw your eyes. They weren't blurred. They were not distorted. They were filled with something that made my blood run cold. Despair. As if he was trapped somewhere he couldn't escape. And the moment our eyes met, the radio crackled louder, and the voice came back, clear this time. "Get me out of here." My body became paralyzed. This wasn't just a ghost, any friendship. Diego was aware. He knew it was there. He knew we could see it. And worse, he knew something was holding him back. I feel a pressure in my chest, a fear I can't explain. Rafa took my arm. "What do we do? What do we do?" But I had no answer. Everything inside me screamed to hit the gas and get out of there. But then Diego took a step forward. Just And it was enough for me to understand that he needed us. I swallowed hard, and against every instinct of self-preservation, I stopped the car on the side of the road. The radio was crying non-stop now, as if something was interfering with the frequency. The air inside the car was heavy, charged with electricity. "Diego," Danny whispered, hesitantly. The man on the road didn't respond, but took another step toward us. And then the world seemed to freeze. The headlight illuminated his face better, and for the first time, I saw it. Behind him in the darkness of the road there were shadows. Not ordinary shadows, but something dense, distorted, as if the night itself was trying to pull him inside. My throat dries up. That behind Diego wasn't just darkness. It was something alive, pulsing, as if it was moving without actually moving. It was as if the road wanted to swallow him back. My whole body screamed to get out of there, but my feet were stuck on the floor of the car. "This is wrong," Lucas muttered, barely speaking. And I was. Diego was trying to get to us, but something was holding him back. That's when I understood. He wasn't just asking for help. He was fighting something. Then, out of nowhere, the car lights flashed. The engine choked. The radio screeched so loud it made our ears hurt. Diego looked at us with pure despair in his eyes, and his mouth opened, but without a sound. It was at that moment that the shadows moved. They grabbed him, not with his hands because they had no defined shape, but he was pulled back as if he were being swallowed into the road itself. "No!" Danny mentioned, and I knocked on the car's dashboard, trying to start the engine. Diego struggles, eyes wide in pure terror. And then, in a last-ditch effort, his voice cut through the radio's crackle. "I'll get out of here!" The engine finally started, and I stepped on the gas without thinking. The wheels squealed on the asphalt as the car pulled away, but my eyes were still fixed on the rearview mirror. Diego was being pulled into the road, as if he were sinking into something invisible. His hands shook in the air, trying to grab onto anything. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. All that was left was the empty road, as if he had never been there. The radio went silent. The hissing stopped. The car was moving, but inside us the silence was absolute. Nobody spoke. Nobody could breathe properly. Only the noise of the tires against the asphalt filled the void. We went straight to Lucas's house without saying a word. When we finally stopped, we sat there sitting in the car, staring into space. "That was real, right?" Danny cut through the silence, her voice weak. I could only nod. Because yes, it was real. We saw. We listened. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was what came next. Because as much as we had run away from that road, I knew it wasn't over. Diego was still there. And now, every time I pass that highway, no matter the day or time, I can't help but look in the rearview mirror. Because deep down, a part of me is afraid of what might be following me. The road at night has always had a different kind of loneliness. For anyone who has never spent hours driving without seeing a living soul, it's hard to understand. The world becomes just a tunnel of light from the headlights. The monotonous sound of the engine and the infinite darkness on both sides of the highway. I was on one of these trips, transporting cargo across the state, when I saw a man on the side of the road. A backpacker standing under a dim streetlight silently raises the question. It was late, and I usually didn't hitchhike, but something about the scene made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he looked, standing there motionless. Or maybe he was just so tired. The face seemed normal at first glance. Jeans, dark jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder. But as soon as he got into the truck, the air seemed to change. He sat in the passenger seat and closed the door slowly, without making any noise. I didn't thank you. I didn't say your name. Nothing. There was only the road ahead. I drove in silence for a few minutes, waiting for him to bring up the subject. But he didn't say anything. It didn't even move. I didn't take my cell phone. I didn't adjust my backpack. Nothing. He just breathed, deep and rhythmic. With each passing second, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew stranger. I'm not one to scare easily, but something about that face made me uncomfortable. It was then that he finally opened his mouth. His voice was low, hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. Have you ever seen something you'd like to forget? My stomach sank. That question caught me off guard, and for a moment all I could do was keep my eyes fixed on the road. Something about his tone didn't seem like casual conversation. It wasn't curiosity, nor an attempt to break the ice. It was something wrong. What? I blurted out, trying to buy time. It was then that he slowly turned his head towards me. And shine. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was too long, too big, as if the very skin of the face was stretched beyond what should be possible. My blood ran cold. It didn't seem human. My breathing became short, my chest tight. Every instinct inside me screamed to hit the brakes and tell him to get out of there. But my hands were rigid on the steering wheel. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just smiled in that distorted way, his teeth showing, as if he was waiting for my answer. I felt my muscles working, as if an invisible weight was weighing down on my shoulders. Then, without saying anything else, he turned his face back to the road, as if nothing had happened. As if that moment was just a blur in my mind. But I knew what I saw. I knew this was real. The rest of the way to the stopping point was silent hell. I tried to focus on the road, but my heart was hammering in my chest. The backpacker remained motionless next to me, looking straight ahead, without saying anything else. But I felt his presence, heavy, suffocating. Every fiber in my body said I needed to get rid of him. When I finally saw the sign come down from the gas station 2 kilometers away, I made a decision. I'm going to stop here. I need to get gas, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't respond. He just grabbed his backpack, and the moment I stopped the truck in the parking lot, he opened the door and slowly got out. Before closing it, he looked at me once again, still with that impossible smile. I felt a shiver run up my spine when he said in an almost amused tone, "See you around?" I closed the door tightly and got out of there as quickly as possible. My head was spinning. My skin was covered in cold sweat. I need to put as much distance between myself and that face, driving non-stop for hours, trying not to think about that smile, that question. But the feeling that something was wrong didn't leave me. When morning came, I turned on the radio to try to distract myself. That's when my breath caught. The news came bluntly. The Highway 46 rest stop was closed overnight following reports of an unidentified man harassing travelers. Reports describe an individual wearing blue jeans and a dark jacket, carrying a backpack. He approached several people asking, "Have you ever seen anything you'd like to forget?" My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. My entire body went cold. It was him. There was no way it could be coincidental. The backpacker I left at the gas station, with that impossible smile, was now in the news. But what really scared me was the reporter's tone. She didn't say he had been arrested, not even if he had been identified, only that the station was closed because it was disturbing travelers. What did it do? What did he do? I turned the radio on full blast, waiting for more information. But the news had already changed. And then an even worse thought hit me. I looked in the rearview mirror, feeling my stomach turn. What if he was still with me? My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone and opened the dashcam app. I scrolled until the moment I caught the backpacker. There he was, standing on the side of the road. I saw him get into the truck, sit down, stay quiet. But then I fast-forwarded the video to the moment he shined, and my heart almost stopped. His face wasn't there, just a distorted blur, a shapeless smudge where his eyes, his nose, his mouth should be. But I knew he had a smile for me. The camera failed to capture it, just as he failed to capture the face of something that shouldn't exist. I dropped the cell phone as if I had just touched something rotten. My chest was rising and falling rapidly, my entire body shaking. This was not normal. This was not human. I ran my hands over my face, trying to think, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe a camera error, maybe tiredness, paranoia. But I knew the truth. I saw that smile. I heard that question. And now, he was outside, approaching other travelers. But why? What did he want? I looked in the rearview mirror once again, feeling that cold chill on the back of my neck. The road behind me was empty. No cars, no lights, nothing but asphalt and infinite darkness. But the feeling of being watched doesn't go away. It grew inside me, suffocating. I started the truck and accelerated. I just wanted distance. I wanted to forget. But then my mind suggested something that made my blood freeze. Have you ever seen something you'd like to forget? Yes, I saw. And now, no matter how hard I tried, I knew I would never make it again.